An essential part of the trim, if I can even call it that,
right.
like the essential part, is everything that leads up to why the horse needs a trim in the first place. So before we get into the trim, we want to talk a lot about the 4 essential areas that we want to be very cognizant of when we come up to a horse and look at their feet and decide that we're going to trim it. So the first one obviously is the trim itself. So what's the shape of the foot? We talked about feet that are a year grown out, feet that are, at a disadvantage in terms of what the footing has been, maybe they've been shod before, etc. So we actually have the barefoot performance trim. And each one of these topics can be broken down into a million pages. So the 4 main areas: the trim, the lifestyle, what this horse has to eat, what they bring into their bodies, and of course what they're doing as a job. So how they're being trained, what are they out in a pasture, are they being used in a high performance athlete, and everything in between. Are they going out and getting cattle every other day? So there's lots of different functions that the horse, therefore the feet, perform.
And ages and everything that makes an effect on what we're going to trim and what we're not going to trim and why we're trimming.
Yeah. What we want to now go into is, well, what about barefoot and natural? Like, what is barefoot and natural, and why are we doing this trim in particular? Why are we looking at all these aspects of the horse? And why do we look at a wild horse model? What is the wild horse? Why are we mimicking the wild horse? So, what is that?
Okay, so before we go into there, we talked about barefoot performance trim. Now, we don't want to label our trim as a method. We don't want to say, well, no, you have to first do this and that and the other thing and whatever. It's not a method. You've got to get that out of your head right now, that you can't learn. You can learn a method, and it will work for maybe 80% of the horses out there if it's a decent method. But you're going to run up to 20% or more that it doesn't work for, and then people say, well, we tried barefoot, it didn't work for us. It didn't work. We tried it. I'm sure you've heard it. And so we don't want to just leave you thinking that you're going to learn a method of trim, but you're going to learn to discern what is needed to make a healthy foot and a healthy horse and a happy horse. And I think everybody wants that too. Just having a sound, sane partner that we can trust and keep healthy. And
so behind Equinextion is that we don't want to make your horse a wild horse. Nobody has a wild horse. We want to be able to partner with our horse. So the whole purpose of those 4 components and focusing in on this performance trim is to make your horse stronger than wild. It's not just about the trim. So we want to make them stronger than wild.
if you look online for barefoot trimming anywhere, you will find that they're modeling the wild horse. And usually they just go, that horse. The American West horse. I like that horse. I like that feet. And they're in like the perfect environment in Nevada. And they're on arid and desert-like footing, not lush green, snow-filled swamps or whatever. That foot looks that way because of its environment, not because it's a wild horse. And I think that's a huge misconception out there, that they're like, well, do wild horses have rolls, or wild horses have a foot shape like this? Those wild horses have a foot shape like that. The ones that live in that environment. And I think that's a huge misunderstanding that's out there, that we model every trim against these feet. And they're not the only wild horses out there.
Go ahead.
Canadian West horses. So these horses are found in the foothills of Alberta, right close to where I live. And they go through all kinds of seasonal changes, and their feet do not look anywhere near like the horses in Nevada's feet. And they get longer because they go through snow. When you've got a lot of snow, they need their snowshoes on. They don't need a foot that's shaped for a desert, hard, rocky area. Their feet go through these changes yearly. So they grow, and it keeps growing, growing, and growing, like you can see on the bottom picture. So what happens, that's in wet climate in the snow, and then when it dries up in the spring, the wall hardens, and it starts to chip and and chunk off, and that's self-trimming, and that's how the wild horses trim their own feet. They break off their own feet, and that is a natural, normal process of self-trimming. So there are things that we can pick up and look at a foot and discern if it's about to self-trim or if it's breaking off in the wrong areas or why it's breaking out in this area, and guide it into a more uniform shape that for when we use them as riding and or driving companion animals, whatever, that we want to keep them at the utmost health. So these are not the only wild horses either in Canada. And so there's Sable Island that has wild horses. Now these are not the models that we want to emulate when we're trimming, of course, but that happens because of their environment, not the fact that they are wild horses. Environment is a huge thing. And so some people say, like, my environment, I'm a boarding barn, I'm this, I only have this mud pen or whatever. But there's things you can do within that, which we'll get to in more of when we do an EQ system presentation.
We talk about traditional. A term that we use is traditional, is what we've been doing, say, for the last couple of 100,000 years. Traditional horsekeeping is the horsekeeping that evolved out of having to bring our horses out of the wild and into captivity. Traditional then, moved forward to, well, we don't use them for work anymore. Now we're using them for sport, for play, for partnership. But we're not letting go of some of those traditional methods of keeping them, shoeing them, feeding them. So what we intend to do is to demonstrate how we can have superior to traditional. So we have stronger than wild by respecting their inner nature, by respecting the nature of the horse, and taking the convenience of tradition that we like to have our horses close to us, but we're going to make that a superior environment for our horses to live in. So when we talk about breaking away from tradition, traditional, as we have on the right-hand side of our diagram here, is, we'll have a 10 by 10, maybe even bigger, 12 by 12 stalls.
14
we'll have
by 14 if you're really lucky.
Yeah.
You care about your horse.
That's right.
You hear that like, oh, my horse doesn't stay in a standing stall, for the love of God. He's got a 14 by 14. And it's cleaned twice a day, and it's got access to the air conditioner, and he's got a filter, and he
has a window to the outside,
yeah,
or a half door, now he's looking outside.
And he loves his stall. He comes in every night. He wants his food, and he loves it. So, I mean...
And we love it as humans. I have a little daughter, and she loves to make little places that she could keep her horse and put him to bed in her little play area of her plastic horse world. And I'm always trying to get her to turn them out. But it's like this innate thing we have in us to make them cozy and warm and protect them and give them spaces just like we would like. So we want to break away from the humanizing, there's a technical word in that word, anthropomorphizing our horses. So I noticed it in my 6-year-old child that's what she wants to do, and everything out there in traditional world is going to reinforce that for her, because that's what we want to do. So we have to break away from our needs and really focus on the horse's needs.
I think it's been such ingrained, like you said, in our society, that it's even, you go to some fancy boarding barns and the indoor board is like $9,000, and the paddock board, which is a little mud square outside, is like, $7,000, and then, but it goes down, and then when they're just in the pasture, when you have to walk way back there, that's only like $200 a month, and that should be switched. Because we can design the land, but we're going to talk a lot about that, about designing land and keeping the land healthy as well. But just the idea of it costs more to keep them in a stall, it really does, right? It really does cost more, but it costs more on so many levels, not just financially. And it costs the horse more on the wear and tear on his body, even just standing for that long. Try yourself. Go lay on the couch for like 20 hours a day, and then get up in the gym and train, and have your trainer whip you into shape and do your running and whatever, and then quickly go back to your couch and lay down and watch Netflix. And then 20 hours later, you get up and you do it again. And how's your body going to feel? How's your mind going to feel? Especially when the trainer comes in and says, okay, let's go. It's time to go. You don't have any say. So basically giving them a natural lifestyle helps in so many levels, including the feet, but on so many levels in their mind, their body, their spirit, their trainability, their overall health and wellness and soundness. So that's, and then you have a healthy foot, then you have a sound foot, then you have a happy foot when the horse is happy. So we're going to talk more about that.
And that's exactly the perfect point, is why do we bring all of this up? And we were, often in discussions we'll find out, well, I'm trimming, I'm doing everything right, I'm following your advice, I'm doing this, I'm bringing that back, I'm pushing this, and nothing's working. Yeah, nothing's working, and then I wait a week and it didn't develop the way that I thought it would have developed the foot. I didn't see the frog pop out, and the digital cushion isn't getting any harder, etc. And likely we'll look at all the areas of the horse's life and identify a few deficiencies there. So between wild and traditional is like night and day. Confinement, limited turnout, like you were saying, if you're only out 4 hours a day. Solitude, no friends, etc. Less moving if I'm out there by myself. Muck, poop, meals, just everything contributes to the health of your horse. And when we're talking about the foundation of the horse, we're talking about the feet. So you need to be aware of if you're trimming a horse who's living a very traditional lifestyle, you're going to be up against a lot more than just the trim.
So you can be the best trimmer in the whole wide world, and you cannot trim your way out of a shit pen. And you cannot trim your way out of environment or bad diet. If that horse is standing there eating sugar cubes for a bucket of sugar cubes, because he really loves them. If he's eating that, it's going to show up in his feet. It's going to show up in the white line connection that's going to be not there, or the white line is going to be all thin and shriveled and not pliable and not sealing anything. So it's going to show up in the feet, whatever they're eating, whatever they're standing in, how much they're moving. Even their mental health has, I think, it shows up in their feet because of the way the body functions in ways that we have yet to understand. So always be aware of all of these variables. You don't have to know everything about it. You don't have to know how to fix every little thing. Right. It's start to create an awareness, a mindfulness when it comes to when you're dealing with your horse, or you're visiting other people's and you're looking at their feet, or you're looking at their bodies, or you're looking at how happy their horses seem, how much, So just be aware of all the different things that could be influencing before you actually even pick up that foot. So the native grasses and the seeded fields, I've noticed this over the last couple decades, that the more and more people are getting into horses, that means more and more land is going to hay. And the hay fields are some of them are monocultured, so they're just one kind of grass, or sprayed with fertilizers and
insecticide.
That in itself, some horses will react to that. Just over the years, we've heard an explosion in Cushing's or insulin resistance, and now everybody's heard of it. Whereas 25 years ago, that thing didn't really exist. But now horses are becoming more and more popular. There's more and more of them. And there's a really light, beautiful side to the horse industry, and there's also a really dark side to the horse industry. So a horse in any kind of wild or natural environment would be out there foraging for food. So what does foraging mean? Foraging doesn't mean standing in front of a round bale with your head down in the middle of it, eating all day long. And that's not what free choice hay means either, or free choice feed. So we tend to give them meals when they're in a more confined area, like here's your allotted 2 flakes in the morning, 2 flakes at night, and 1 flake at 10 p.m. or something if they're in a stall. Or if they're in pens or paddocks, it's just easier to just toss the hay over in one pile versus spreading it out. There's a lot of, have you heard of the slow feeders now? That's sort of coming in. And now slow feeders have been out for several years, and now we're noticing some not so positive effects on the slow feeders as well. Foragers are looking for small amounts of food, and they're traveling a big distance to get that food.
And the foraging really acts with the brain too, the health of the horse.
Yeah.
So, you know, you think about boredom or more stimulating and getting their minds in and working, and then they're walking. So what's happening with their feet? You know, they're getting more movement. They're scraping at things. They're doing it's your horse sort of wakes up and becomes alive when you start to see them actually solving problems in that way. You know. And one of Lisa's tricks she shared with me early on was you take a handful of seeds or oats and you just kind of sprinkle them as you're going through. You're just throwing them around, and then your next thing
on spreading hay or whatever.
Yeah, to sort of say, hey, remember this in your innate nature, remember?
Yeah.
Because a lot of horses are also being transitioned back into a natural state.
And I think when you said that, I was thinking about some of the rehab horses that come to me that they don't even know how to go out and graze. Some of them have been in the stall so long they have to spread their legs like a giraffe to get their face on the ground in order to be getting some grass. Because they're so used to being fed up here and in a bucket, and here's your water bucket. And I met a horse that came to my place 10 years. He never, ever stayed outside a night in his whole life. And he was a high-end show horse, and he didn't know how. So these horses are transitioning, but you can still plug them in. There's a transition period that you can plug them into their innate nature and turn on something inside, and everything changes. Everything changes after that for the better.
And coming from a learning to trim perspective too, if you're learning, so let's say your horse once had shoes, mine once had shoes way back when, and you're learning to trim and you're wanting to do your own horses, and you can assist your own horse into these transitions while you transition as well. You know, our horses will do the path of least resistance as well. So these are all things we're talking about rehabilitation, but when you're starting to bring your horse into the barefoot world and the performance trims, you can also help them to transition in all of these aspects of their lives too, and be able to plug them in as well. While you're plugging yourself in, while you're learning, they'll learn along with you.
So this has been a pet peeve of mine for many years. Long before I started trimming, I was a trainer and a rider and a judge, and these are the kind of things that I've seen out in the world, and it's still prevalent today. Although there's much more awareness to going bitless and gentle way of training, and that's well and good. But even this kind of domination thing it affects the way they wear their feet. Like the bottom horse, he's got his head tied up like this. He's landing on his feet differently than the horse that would have his head down and flowing forward. And his back is affected, his mind is affected, everything else is affected. So that's just been a pet peeve of mine for a while. So even learning how to move your horse in a different way from the ground, learning or having him learn how to be outside. Well, he doesn't want to go out in the pasture. He stands at the gate to come in at night. He waits. And so he likes the stall. But if you think of it just a little bit differently, is that a horse will run back into a burning building. You know, you've heard of the ponies running back into mines that are collapsing because they are creatures of habit, and that's what they know to do. So when they're standing at the gate waiting to come into the barn, they're doing so because it's a habit. So to break some of these habits is sometimes hard for the human, because they're like, oh, my poor little snooze cakes, he wants to go in. And I need to honor that and put him inside because he likes to be inside. But really, in a week, you can break them off the gate and have this whole other amazing animal come out because he's now in his space. When you're not working with him, when you're not partnering with him, he's got a whole life going on outside of you. So he has more mental health to stabilize him. There'd be way less accidents if we all kept our horses in a more natural way. Everybody's had horror stories of their misbehaviors and whatever, and 99% of the time it's their mental health is not well. And why isn't it well? it comes down to diet, lifestyle, trim, and training. So that's a far cry from nature. And that's what you have to deal with right now. That doesn't mean you can't do enhancements. That doesn't mean you can't up it a little bit. It doesn't mean you can't take a step towards the ideal. So don't think that it has to be all ideal and all there and all at once or nothing at all. You can take many different steps to have healthier feet, and it just means more work on our part as the owner and to be able to make positive changes in environments.
And it's an initial work.
Yeah.
It's versus every day I have to do turnout and clean stalls, and that's daily work. We're talking about an initial investment. When she says more work,
Yeah.
you know, it's more work from us and it's a learning process. But ultimately, once they're going, you have a little routine.
Much more self-sustaining.
But much more self-sustaining.
Yeah. So consequences and common health issues today: founder navicular, white line disease, colic, insulin resistance, like we said, ulcers, parasites are getting huge now. And now everybody's always heard, like, oh, you just deworm them. And now we're like, oh, no, wait, don't deworm them until we know what we're targeting. And we've got resistant parasites to the dewormers, and they're just getting bigger and stronger. There's so many enhancements you can do that raises their immune system so that they can take care of themselves, as they are meant to do, as we are all meant to do.
And so only 3 of those, you can look at that list of 8 health issues, and 3 of them you can directly attribute in the foot. But you'll actually notice all 8 of them can present themselves through some foot ailment. Yeah. So everything comes back down to the foot and the foundation of the horse. If they have insulin resistance, there's going to be evidence of that in the foot.
Yeah, you can pick that up and go, have you had any laminitis? And the person goes, no. I don't think so, and you're like, well, I see things here that tell me. So it's like reading the foot. The foot will tell you the story of the past.
And we come back to anatomy. And why we review anatomy, especially as trimmers, obviously. But it's because, and like we pointed out at the very beginning, you want to know what a healthy foot looks like. But also, when you're not seeing what appears to be healthy, it appears to be unhealthy, or little blips on the map, as we say, there could be a myriad reasons why they're going on in the horse as well as outside the horse.
And it's not always about the trim.
And that's right, yeah. So we're talking about, you have to look at everything, including possible diseases that are going on inside the horse that, again, could be caused by external factors. So it all comes back in together. It all is interrelated.
That's the formula. So we call it the equation. Get the play on words there? Equation. So you take the best of the wild, what we've learned from the wild horses, and we add that or plus that to the convenience of tradition. We need to keep them in fences, whether we like it or not. And times being true to their nature. So we're going to show tips and tricks and enhancements to be made, even if you have a small land or a big land. There's always things that you can do towards positive. And then you will get a super horse. That's what we call a super horse, in mind, body, and spirit, something that's balanced everywhere. And starting with the foundation up and everywhere with you.
And then we just come right back to the 4 elements, the 4 major elements here, and how you can make the connection between all of the elements. So we call it it's a natural approach to horse keeping with very, very simple enhancements, and you will get the strongest, best horse you can have, including the feet. And it starts from the feet, the foundational feet. Okay.